Okay, we've got a good few people here, so I'll start this webinar now. So this webinar is a hands-on first look at JBoss EAP 6. EAP 6 was released last week by Red Hat. It's the latest in their line of application servers. It's based on the JBoss Community Application Server 7 version, so no doubt at some point that's going to cause some confusion. Which is from the ground rewrite pretty much of their line of application servers. There are some big changes. Certainly the changes between 4 and 5 are nothing compared to the changes between EAP 5 and 6 or application server 5 and 7. So the lineage really, so JBoss 4 used JMX microkernel, JBoss 5 moved to a Pojo-based microcontainer system for the application server. JBoss Application Server 6, the community version, continued using this Pojo-based microcontainer, and then in JBoss 7 they've moved to a completely new service-based container. They've rewritten most of their interfaces, the administration interface, the way you interact with the server, the domain structure and everything like that are different. So our first look today, this webinar is basically just going to be a quick skim over what you get when you unzip it, what it looks like. We'll touch on the key files, what they're used for. I'll show you how you get it up and running, get into the console, quick view of what you can do with the console, and then if we've got time we'll have a go at maybe deploying an application and seeing how we can do that, the various ways that we can deploy applications and things. So if you've got any questions, then there's a little questions button in the webinar interface that you can click to ask questions, or you can type them in the chat interface and I'll probably see them there. Or feel free to, if you have any questions, email me at mbrasier@c2b2.co.uk and I'll answer questions if I can there. So JBoss EAP 6, you get it from Red Hat as a download from their website, from your customer portal. And the download is a zip file. Essentially there's a number of downloads. The easiest download to take is the zip file, so they offer you a number of different installers, graphical installers and non-graphical installers, and ones that just download the components you need, but the easiest thing to take is just a straight zip file installer. This is one of the nice things about JBoss. It's very refreshing when you spend time working with the other big application servers like WebLogic and WebSphere, where you have this big, massive, great big Oracle installer that involves everything in the planet and going off and talking off to the internet and trying to install all sorts of things and asking all sorts of really complicated questions, and all you really want to do is just get the application server installed. So basic install, we can extract the contents of that zip file. 6.0.0 is the current release. It's just it's their first release. It's based on 7.1, I believe, of the 7.1 of the application server release, and it's some big changes have happened in the past couple of months, so past year really. JBoss Application Server 7, the core version, came out in around nearly a year ago. I wrote a blog on it then. It was a very immature release. It was, in my opinion, pushed out too early to a GA release. There were large numbers of features that weren't there or were only partially there, so they could tick a box to say that it was there in terms of a marketing flyer, but there was no way that an application developer could build an application on that feature. So they had a long way to go. It was very obviously kind of a release just to make some marketing noise, to get some information out there, and everyone was holding their breath and seeing what was going to happen in the EAP 6 release. So we've got EAP 6 now. I'll show you the directory structure. So there's quite a bit of change in what the directory structure looks like compared to an old version of JBoss. So what people would be used to would be directories for sort of the bin directory, and then the server directory containing all of the server related stuff, which would contain the domain configurations underneath, like default and all, and that kind of thing, and minimal. and then you would have the directories for the lib directory, which would have the libraries needed for bootstrapping the kernel itself and that kind of thing. So some of that is still there. We still have a docs directory, which contains, again, examples, information on the licensing, the XML schemas and DTDs that are used by the application server. We have a bin directory, which contains the scripts that we use for starting and stopping the server. Some of these will be familiar to you. Most of these will be probably new. A lot of the scripts have changed. Then there's a bundles directory and a modules directory. So I mentioned that JBoss EAP 6 is based on a service container. These services are really bundled into modules, and these modules get loaded by the server. So here we can look at, say, some of the org JBoss modules. We can dig into a module. It has a module XML that defines the various components of that module and how it's loaded. Let's make this font a bit bigger and we'll be able to see some of the files. So that's 24-point font. So this, can't really see much here actually. It's not very well formatted in Notepad, but this defines a set of modules that get loaded, the jar files that get loaded by that module. So when you have a dependency on this module, it will load those various jar files and the various packages that that module provides. So on the modules, we then have two key directories here, Standalone and Domain. So JBoss EAP 6 has two different ways of running. One is standalone mode, and that's the easiest one to explain. So this is like a normal JBoss server where you had it before. So each server had its own configuration files, its own copy of the configuration. You start up the server, it reads its configuration files. That configuration file might contain information on clustering, in which case the server can join a cluster. It might not contain any information about clustering, in which case the server will run standalone. But all of the management of that server is performed locally on that box, and all of the configuration is local on that box. The second mode that JBoss EAP 6 can run in is domain mode. And in domain mode, then a server is part of a domain. That domain essentially is has a central configuration repository, so there is one file on one machine. You then have a domain controller which knows where that file is and can load it. You have host controllers that know where the domain controller is. And when you want to start up a server, you say, I want to start up a server with this particular profile. That profile maps to a server configuration in the domain XML file. Your host controller contacts the domain controller and says, please send me the relevant configuration for a server of this profile. The domain controller sends that configuration over to the host controller, and the host controller can then start out a server using the relevant configuration. So this means that you have a central configuration, you have a central location where all of your changes are done from. You can centrally start and stop servers from a single location. So this approach is much more like the approaches that application servers like WebLogic and WebSphere and things like that have had in the past, where you can centrally manage and configure your estate of JBoss servers or estate of application servers for a number of applications or a single application, but where you have multiple machines involved. And you don't have to write your own SSH scripts that are going to SSH into 6 different servers, start the JBoss instances, and then check that they're all running and that kind of thing, which is what most customers have ended up doing in our experience. So this change is a very welcome change. It's a very big step in the right direction, I think, for JBoss in enterprise deployments where customers are going to have more than one instance of JBoss running. They're going to have more than one, the application is going to be deployed across more than one instance, quite possibly tens of instances. We've seen a number of customers who have applications that run across tens of instances of JBoss, and having to log into each of those servers, start all the servers, stop all the servers, or whatever, is a pain. So having this ability to centrally start and stop the servers, configure them, make your configuration change in a single place is going to be a big advantage. So we'll start by digging down into the standalone configuration. So here we have a couple of files. We have a configuration folder, which contains configuration files. I'll show you that in a minute. We have a deployments folder where you can drop applications or other deployment units into, and those applications will get deployed. So this is a feature that's only available in the standalone mode. Domain mode, you can't hot deploy applications by just dropping them into a folder. They have to be deployed through the API, either the command line API, the JBoss configuration and management API, or through the web console, which uses the command line API. We've got a lib folder, which, as you can guess, contains libraries and that kind of thing, and then there's a temp folder, which again, I'm sure you'll be able to guess, contains the temporary files that get generated as part of this ongoing process of starting the servers and that kind of thing. So deployment, understandably, is empty at the moment, and configuration is where all the interesting stuff is. So standalone, we have a number of profiles similar to how JBoss used to work. JBoss used to have a number of different folders, and each of those folders would contain a profile. So there was a default profile, all profile, and a minimal profile, and then in the EAP versions, then you also normally got profiles for a tuned performance profile and that kind of thing. So we have these different files that basically contain different profiles, and we'll look at one of these in a bit more detail. Let's just increase the font size a bit. So profile file, so it defines the server. The server contains a number of modules, so we've got InfiniSpan, configurations, connectors, deployment scanners, and all of these different modules that make up the server. We also define an authentication realm, so users, configuration directories, and configuration properties that are used. We define the interfaces that are used in the server, so the various ports that they listen on, and the sockets that are used, so these are mapped into a set of sockets later on. We define some login configurations for the server. Then, so this is where it starts getting interesting, and we define some other subsystems that you would not normally have seen in the JBoss configuration. So here we have a data source, example DS. This whole data source is configured in this file, so there is no external configuration file. It's not like JBoss EAP5 where you had, say, your myds-ds.xml file, which contained all the configuration for your data source. All of the configuration goes into this standalone XML. So all of your JMS queues, all of your data sources, every single piece of configuration is in this single central file. So that's a big change. It's caused it's an approach that's been used by other application servers for a while. It has caused a bit of controversy, but I think in general it's a reasonable approach. It would be nice to have a hybrid approach where you could have your data sources or JMS connections or whatever defined in a separate file, but it does make things a bit easier. The disadvantage is that if you want to deploy an application, or you want to provide someone with an application, and you want to provide them with the data source, you can no longer just provide them with the XML file for the data source that they would deploy alongside the application. You're going to have to rely on them to configure the data source through the various APIs, or provide them with some kind of scripting that would do that. Because or you're going to have to do something really horrible like trying to line edit or stream edit the standalone XML to inject the necessary data source. So all of this configuration here, so we're defining the pool sizes and cache policies for EJBs, thread pools, everything in the whole server. So all of the configuration that you'd find across all of the separate configuration files of JBoss previously is now all in this standalone XML file. So here we have the interface bindings. So the management interface by default binds to 127.0.0.1. The normal basic interface binds by default to 127.0.0.1. Secure interface binds to 127.0.0.1 by default unless you specify on the command line. So you can specify these -d jboss.bind.address.unsecure, -d jboss.bind.address, and -d jboss.bind.address.management, and force it to listen on different interfaces. So then socket binding, so we define the ports. So HTTPS port is on 9443, the AJP port on 8009, HTTP on 8080, HTTPS on 8443, the management port on 8090, on 8090. So all of these different ports, and the interesting ones here, so some of the more interesting ones. So the management HTTP port is 9990. This is one worth noting because the console is no longer served by the normal HTTP connector. It is served through the management interface, which is listing on a different, bound to a different interface, or potentially bound to a different interface. So this means that you can bind your management interfaces to an internal IP address that's not internet routable, and then requests to the management interface, so that's requests to access the console, but also any JMX requests or requests that are coming in using the JBoss management API, they can only come over that internal interface, so you wouldn't be open to requests coming in externally from other services. And we'll see in a minute that 9990 is going to be the port that we will use for our connecting to the web console when we connect to that. So that's a standalone XML. It's a relatively large file, but pretty comprehensive. It makes sense when you go in and look at it, which is a big difference to the previous versions of JBoss, because previously there would be so many references between different files, it would be difficult to understand exactly what was going on. Now there's a lot more consistency, there's a lot more consistent terminology, there's a lot more consistent use of the way that properties are defined, whether things are attributes or elements and that kind of thing, so this single file is a lot easier to understand and learn. So as well as standalone mode, there's also the option of running in domain mode. You'll notice that in domain mode then we have these three directories, so configuration, data and temp. We don't have the deployments directory because, as I mentioned, it's not possible to drop an application into a domain mode server into a folder in a domain mode server and have it deployed. So the only way to deploy applications in domain mode is through one of the administration interfaces. So we'll dig down into configuration, and you'll notice that the files we've got here are different. So rather than just the standalone XML, which is what we had before, then we've got some host XMLs and a domain XML. So the host XMLs are files that are used by host controllers. Host XML defines essentially the server that's, I'll open one of these up for you, the server configuration. So I'll make this a little bit bigger, not quite as big as last time. So this is essentially going to do port binding. So what we're going to do is we're going to, server XML contains server-specific information that is then used to map a profile for a server, a profile for a JBoss instance that's been taken from the domain onto the local machine. So you're saying we're going to start up a copy of this profile, and we're going to bind it to these instances, these interfaces and these ports, which is what might be separate from machine to machine. So here we've got the same kind of stuff that we saw in standalone XML for the various ports, the amount of memory that you want to use, JVM options that you want to start the server, server names for the servers that you're going to start, and the configuration. So we've got two servers here, server 1 and server, well, three servers, server 1, server 2, server 3. Whether we're going to automatically start these servers, so server 1 and 2 automatically start in main server group, server 3 is in other server group and doesn't automatically start. and we can specify a port offset, so 150, 250, to offset the ports to avoid port clashes. So these settings are host-specific settings for when we're running in domain mode that allow us to start up a specific instance of JBoss. And then domain XML defines all of the profiles for all of the servers that we might possibly run across all of our machines. So this is very similar to the standalone XML file, except that you'll see that we're defining a domain rather than a server at the top level. The domain contains all of these extensions. We'll define all the system properties and that kind of thing, and then we will define the various server profiles. And the server profiles have a name. If I can find a server profile. So virtual server profile, these are web service virtual servers. But yeah, we define the various server profiles in here, and then in the host XML we say which of these profiles we want to launch and on what ports we want to launch them. So there's more of a layer of indirection, but I would recommend getting to grips with this domain mode. It is, I think, a much better way of managing and controlling JBoss servers in large-scale enterprise environments. And it is the approach that most other application servers have been taking for a large percentage of the recent time. So we've also got some configuration files about logging and things like that, and some configuration files for users and things like that. So that's the directory structure that we get when we unzip it. Those are kind of the key files, and I'll show what happens now if we start a server in standalone mode. So just move to the right place. So if we want to start a server, we've got a number of batch files or script files that we can use to start the servers. So you'll notice there's a domain.bat and domain.sh that is used for starting servers in domain mode. And you'll also see that there is a standalone.bat and standalone.sh, which will start the files in standalone mode. So just for this demo, I'm going to use the standalone mode. It's a much more simple approach. It's less likely to go wrong during a webinar. So I will do that. So the first thing it's going to tell me that Java Home isn't set on this machine. I can set Java Home in order to get the correct version of the JVM that I want. I'm just going to use the default one on this box, which I think is either a 1.6 or a 1.7 JVM. It's just a Microsoft Office JVM really, so I don't use it for that much else. So we can see that it started up very quickly, so it started up in just less than 10 seconds. It started 134 out of its 214 configured services. 79 services are passive or on demand. So this is telling us that it started up essential stuff. It started up HTTP connectors and things like that. But there are a lot of services that it doesn't bootstrap until a component needs to use them. So this gives us a much quicker startup time compared to previous versions of JBoss. So JBoss EAP 5, 40 seconds to several minutes wouldn't be an unusual start time. And if you're just using small components, small parts of the application, then you're going to see performance improvements. The disadvantage really, though, is that in live environments, if you've got an application that does need a lot of services, then the first time that application gets deployed or someone tries to access those services, then you're going to have a bit of slowdown whilst it goes and starts up and deploys all of those services that it hadn't eagerly started. So we've got our server started up, and we can see what happens if we try and go to the administration console. This isn't going to work, I can tell you now, just so that you know that I'm not making mistakes when we hit it. So we hit this and it tells us that we can't access the admin console because we haven't created a user yet. So previously JBoss application servers would ship, so the community versions would ship with admin normally is the username and password. In fact, the community versions will quite often ship without a username and password, so there was no security on any of the management interfaces. The EAP versions would ship with security enabled but no configured user and password, which was a bit of an improvement, except that there was admin commented out at the top of the file, so normally everybody just went in there and commented the admin. The number of customers that we would go to that were using admin on live systems was quite scary, although actually the number of customers we would go to that were using community versions of JBoss with no security on the management interfaces on internet-facing machines was also very scary. So this is a big step up in terms of security for the for out-of-the-box JBoss. So there is no admin for you to just uncomment. You're going to have to actually create a user, and we do this using another of the commands in the bin directory. So that's another command prompt. Go to the right directory again. And we have this adduser.sh or adduser.bat command. We run it, it asks us some questions. So do we want to create a management user or an application user? So we want to create a management user. The details of the new user to add to the realm, so management realm we accept for management users. Just to be original, we're going to call our username admin, and we're going to set the password to be admin. And it told us, no, we can't do that. So we're going to use username admin, and we'll use password. Username admin is too easy to guess. Yes, we want to use admin. Yes, we want to add admin to the management realm. Is this user going to be used to connect to slave domain controllers? No, it's not. Done. So now if we refresh this application, it'll ask us to log in. So we can log in. So this is the new JBoss 7 console. There's quite a bit of stuff here. It's not particularly bling. It's a lot better than previous attempts at JBoss consoles. It's still quite a long way from the management consoles of most of the bigger application servers. But it's a good start. They are finally realizing that they need a proper administration console. I'm still not sure that their design and user experience work is quite there. It feels like an administration console written by developers, not by administrators, so it's got all the features that developers will want in it, nice and easy to handle with very few clicks, and all of the stuff that application administrators and JBoss administrators are going to want to do on a day-to-day basis. It takes forever to get done. But we can view, so runtime information, we can view the JVM metrics on memory usage and things like that. We can view runtime information on the JVM, so connection pool usage, JPA metrics, transaction metrics, web service requests, web requests, web service requests. We can view information on the OSGI container or not. And we can view some basic configuration, so code name Steropes is the code name of 712, so that's EAP6. Server is running. We can see the loaded modules. We can scan through the list of loaded modules. We can view the environment properties. So these are the Java environment properties. If we switch over to this profile tab at the top here, we can change the configuration of the server. So for example, if we wanted to change one of the ports that it's listening on, that we could change, say for example, if we wanted to disable the HTTP connector or change the HTTP connector, we could change the socket binding to be one of our previously defined socket bindings, so we could change the HTTP connector to be listening on a different port here. The socket bindings, I forget what the socket bindings are defined. They are in here somewhere. I know how to play around with it. So yeah, you can define a new socket binding, and then you can bind your HTTP connector to listen over your different socket binding all through here. There is a lot of, I think, somewhat unnecessary redirection in project like WebLogic or WebSphere, you can just go in and say, I want my HTTP connector to be listening on port 7000 or whatever. Here you have to define the socket bindings and then do the mapping between the interface binding and the socket binding, and then a mapping between the connector and the interface binding, and there's like a couple too many levels of indirection. Here's a socket binding, sorry. So yeah, so you can define and configure the different socket bindings. So we could add a new socket binding here. We'll call it Bob. And Bob is going to listen on port 8081 in the standard socket group. So we've added this new Bob socket binding. We can now go back to the HTTP connector and edit it, and we could change its socket binding to be Bob, and it would then listen on 8081 instead of 8080. It tells us that we need to restart that server before these changes can take effect. We have messages here, so the recent things, so an unknown error. So we have the messages that have occurred, or the responses to the various commands that we have provided to the configuration. So we've defined the various ports. Again, admin port is 9990 out of the box, so you won't get to this admin console if you try and hit 8080. So one of the other things that we can do is we can do application deployments. So if we want to deploy a new application, we can pick a file on here. I have an application here. It's not a very good sound application to be using as an example because it's one we use in performance tuning labs. It has 3 servlets in it, and all 3 of them demonstrate interesting ways in which to make JBoss run slowly. So verify the deployment configuration, it deploys the application. We can then enable the application. It's enabled. We then I do need to restart the server because I changed the bind address. Just so that you see as well, when it starts up here, we should see that it will bind onto 8081 rather than 8080. So here it was on 8080. If I start it again, we'll hopefully see that this time it starts up on 8081, so that change that I made has been persisted to the configuration file, to that standalone XML. Just looking for socket bindings 990, 8081, there we go, so let me just highlight that. So we bound 8081 with, said was our port that we wanted to use for HTTP. It's made that change and it's persisted that change, which is something that previous versions of JBoss have not been very good. So when you've made changes to the administration console, some things you've been able to change, but primarily when you wanted to make a change to the configuration, you had to do that by going and hacking an XML file. So this demonstrates that you can do that via the console, and when you've got multiple servers in your domain, you can configure them all through the console, and you can set all of the port bindings and things like that through the console. So that started up, and that should have the sample application. So hopefully I should be able to go to localhost 8081 sample app. I forget exactly what the web context is on that application. Let's see if I can find it. So it might be this be sample example. No, I forget what the web context is on that application, so that wasn't a particularly good one to pick for testing it. But we can see that it's deployed the application, and when I've previously done tests and things, and this all seems to work fine. So it's a big step forward in terms of the ability to manage a JBoss application. It's not necessarily that whizzy and that kind of thing, and it's not all of the features quite work. As you saw earlier, we do get occasional little errors popping up, but it's a very big step forward. So between this console, the ability to have domain mode, where this console, or where you can manage multiple servers, you can have multiple machines with JBoss deployed, manage them all in a central location, not have to worry about have I remembered to log on to all of those servers and change the password for the database since the DBA changed it yesterday, or has one of them got the wrong password and it's just going to keep using the wrong password and lock me out. So all of that stuff basically is making JBoss Application Platform 6 a much stronger, much more solid platform going forward. It's definitely moves in the right direction, and it's looking a very strong application server. So that's the first look that we wanted to do for today. We're going to follow this webinar up with more kind of deep dives into some of the more interesting features. We'll also do quite a few blogs on this kind of stuff, again diving into some of the features. If you've got any comments or anything like that, then please ask me now, or you can add comments to our blog posts on the subject, or if you send us email, we'll see if we can get around to do anything. If you have any special requests for features that you'd like us to give some information on, then please let us know. Other than that, thanks for attending the webinar, and I hope you've seen something useful and that you'll be able to go away and have a play with JBoss Enterprise Application Platform 6 and let us know your thoughts on it. So thanks for attending, and we'll hopefully see you on another webinar or a JBoss or something soon. Cheers. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.